to Generation 16, the series showcasing the games of Sega's Mega Drive. I'm your host, Greg Seward. As the game industry hurtles towards the 90s, the Mega Drive library continues to expand with new genres and some new classics. Let's get started. One of those new genres is the dreaded movie license game. Rambo III hit theaters in 1988, and a bunch of different game consoles and computers the following year. Rambo III on the Mega Drive picks up the story after John Rambo has agreed to go into Afghanistan to track down the captured Colonel Troutman. Gameplay is along the same lines as other overhead shooters like Mercs and Ikari Warriors. Rambo runs around the field shooting Russians and taking out large targets and obstacles with the 4 weapons given him: machine guns, bombs, his trusty knife, and exploding arrows. It isn't all just run and gun, though. Some levels actually see Rambo searching for particular prisoners who are escaping an area before it's destroyed. And then there are the pseudo 3D boss fights. These are the bits that make Rambo 3 stand apart on the Mega Drive. They're extremely short, but they break up the action nicely. Unfortunately, like most movie games, Rambo 3 is entirely forgettable. And here we have the first Mega Drive game that originated outside of Japan. Japanese developer Cyclone System is credited with the port, but the original Amiga and Commodore 64 versions of Zoom were released by Discovery Software out of America and developed in Germany as far as I can tell.
Come on, boy.
In Zoom, players have to skate around a collection of grids, completing squares and avoiding various enemies.
Come on, boy.
It feels like a mixture of Pac-Man and Kicks, but with weapons.
Boy. Come on, boy.
There are power-ups strewn throughout each level as well, which do everything from recharge your weapons to grant invincibility to freezing all enemies on the board for a short period of time. There's really not much more to say about Zoom. It's a cute little puzzler that isn't nearly interesting enough to have any sort of staying power. I guess it was pretty timely, considering 1989 is the year that Tetris on the Game Boy blew the puzzle genre wide open on home consoles. It's just not that memorable. Last episode, we looked at Ghouls and Ghosts, the first instance of Sega porting one of Capcom's arcade hits to the Mega Drive. Forgotten Worlds marks the second such occasion. Unfortunately, the results aren't nearly as impressive this time around. Forgotten Worlds is a pretty unique shooter thanks to the ability to fire in 360 degrees. The arcade machine used a special rotating button to achieve this. On the Mega Drive, however, the control scheme is a lot less intuitive. Press A to rotate counterclockwise, C to rotate clockwise, and B to fire. It lacks any sort of real precision and makes the game harder to play than it should be. Another unique feature of Forgotten Worlds is the power-up system. Rather than pick up random item drops like in most shooters, in Forgotten Worlds your character picks up Zenny, a fictional currency used in a few Capcom games back in the day. With this Zenny, you can buy upgraded weapons, refill your life bar, extend your life bar, or even buy extra chances. Forgotten Worlds was actually the first game I ever played on the Genesis, and I don't remember it being this lackluster. The visuals have been pared down to an almost boring level, and I spent more time struggling with the controls than I did enjoying the gameplay. The arcade and PC Engine versions of Forgotten Worlds were head and shoulders above the Mega Drive incarnation. Mystic Defender something of a lost gem of the pre-Sonic Genesis era. This is a really solid Castlevania clone that most folks don't seem to talk about nowadays. Along with Last Battle, it also represents an early anime-inspired Mega Drive game that came to North America without its license and with content altered in order to make it more appropriate for American audiences. More on that later, though. It's also worth noting that, like Last Battle, a previous game in this series was released on the Master System. And, like Last Battle, Mystic Defender's precursor came to the US under a completely different name as well, Spellcaster. I'm not sure why Sega didn't care about continuity when it released these sequels on the Genesis in the US, except to say that it could have something to do with the fact that Tonka was originally in charge of marketing and distribution of the Master System in North America. Mystic Defender started life as Kujaku-ou 2, a game based on a serialized manga following the exploits of a young monk on a spiritual quest to stop Rikudoshu, which is an evil organization set on resurrecting the Peacock King and Snake Queen so that they may fight each other in order to give birth to the dark Vairakana. I don't pretend to know what most of that means, but it's all very religious. There are elements of Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, Taoism, and more here. The American release, on the other hand, follows sorcerer Joe Yamato as he attempts to save a young girl, Alexandra, from the evil sorcerer Zareth, who is trying to revive an ancient evil god named Zal. The key to playing Mystic Defender is proper use of Joe's magic. As you move through the game, Joe gains more abilities, and it's up to you to use them in the most effective way against the waves of enemies that stand between you and Alexandra. This affords the player a level of freedom you usually didn't see in action games back in the late 80s. Though it has to be said that Joe's starting spell is ultimately his most effective. Getting back to those changes for a second. When Kujaku-ou's story got changed in North America, it also resulted in a few graphical updates. First of all, Joe's outfit went from a set of robes to a more masculine ensemble. Likewise, some of the enemies received palette swaps to make them seem less human, particularly the exploding babies on the second level. Here's the weird part, though. After fighting the final boss and rescuing Alexandra, you'll notice that she's completely naked. I don't know if this was an oversight on Sega's part, or someone actually thought it would be acceptable in the US. Needless to say, parents complained. And remember, this is before the existence of anything like the ESRB rating system. So Sega quietly released a second revision of the game in the US that featured a slightly more modest Alexandra during the final battle. All that strangeness aside, Mystic Defender is a really solid early example of Sega's willingness to release interesting, original content on the Mega Drive. It marked a shift away from their early focus on simply porting their arcade titles. The Revenge of Shinobi sits in the company of Phantasy Star 2 and Ghouls and Ghosts as one of the Mega Drive's early landmark games. It's also a completely original sequel to the arcade game Shinobi. It was built from the ground up to run on the Mega Drive, which is probably why it's so damn good. In The Revenge of Shinobi, the criminal organization Zed has reorganized to become Neo-Zed, and has taken revenge on Joe Musashi by killing his master and kidnapping his wife Naoko. What follows is a globe-hopping trip to rescue Joe's woman and destroy his enemies. Gameplay is really similar to the original Shinobi. Joe's weapons include shurikens, swords, and hand-to-hand combat. He's also capable of using 4 types of ninjutsu magic: Ikazuchi, which protects him from damage; Karyu, which summons a flaming dragon to incinerate his enemies; Fushin, which allows Joe to jump higher and further; and Mijin, which results in an explosive sacrifice costing Joe 1 life but damaging all enemies on screen. Unlike a lot of other action games, there's actually a heavy resource management element to Revenge of Shinobi. Joe can very quickly run out of shurikens, meaning you constantly have to assess each situation and decide if it's worth using up your precious distance weapons, or if it's worth risking close combat. Joe also has a mid-air somersault attack that fires an array of shurikens at his enemies, though again, this is really draining on your weapon count. Unless, of course, you use the famous infinite shuriken trick I did at the beginning of this video. The Revenge of Shinobi marks the first appearance of composer Yuzo Koshiro in a Sega game. Koshiro had already started making a name for himself through his earlier work on Nihon Falcom games like Dragon Slayer and Ys, but Revenge of Shinobi really marks his coming out party for most Western gamers. Just listening to Revenge of Shinobi for a bit, you realize that it sounds unlike any Mega Drive game before it. Koshiro would go on to become famous for his soundtracks in other games like ActRaiser, the Streets of Rage series, Beyond Oasis, and Shenmue. Besides being a fantastic game with excellent tunes, Revenge of Shinobi is notable for one other thing: playing fast and loose with other people's intellectual property. Play through a game and you start to notice an awful lot of homages to various other series and characters. For example, the title screen image looks an awful lot like Sonny Chiba's Hattori Hanzo from Shadow Warriors. This flame-throwing character bears more than a passing resemblance to Sylvester Stallone's depiction of John Rambo. This boss seems clearly based off of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and ultimately reveals itself to be a Terminator-like cyborg. And perhaps the most surprising examples, this shape-shifting boss first takes the form of a slightly miscolored Spider-Man. Once he takes enough damage, he morphs into another miscolored superhero. This time it's none other than Batman. And finally, this gigantic boss at the end of the second last stage looks like he should be going on a radioactive rampage through the Japanese countryside. I don't know if Sega itself decided to right these wrongs, or if they were faced with the threat of lawsuits from the various IP owners. Either way, much like Mystic Defender before it, subsequent runs of the Revenge of Shinobi silently changed certain visuals in the game. Revision 1 replaced John Rambo with a slightly older, balder-looking man. It also swiped out the Batman boss with more of a mutant man-bat creature, which actually bears a striking resemblance to Go Nagai's Devilman character. The Spider-Man doppelganger looks as though he's had his unitard dyed to the web-slinger's proper colors. I have a theory that Sega had already officially licensed Spider-Man at the time of this revision, though the legal text for that license wouldn't appear in the game until Revision 2. You'll also notice that Spider-Man no longer morphs into the Man-Bat when he's defeated. Now he just runs away. After all, we can't have a Marvel superhero morphing into a DC superhero, right? By Revision 3, Toho must have noticed the game, because the Godzilla boss has been replaced by a more generic skeletal dinosaur thing. This was the way the game stayed until 2009, when Revision 4 was released on the Wii's Virtual Console service. Here, Spider-Man has changed into a solid pink uniform, probably because Activision now held the Spider-Man license, and Sonny Chiba's likeness has finally been removed from the title screen. I think this stuff is pretty interesting, if only because some people's memories of this great game are slightly different than others. Remember, this stuff wasn't necessarily common knowledge back in the day. Not a lot of Google searches or Wikipedia browsing happening in 1989. And that'll do it for episode 4. Check out the next episode as we finish off December 1989 with the Mega Drive's third RPG, as well as a title that many consider to be the first true real-time strategy game. Thanks for watching.